Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for being here. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Farm Show Finance Project. I know last fall you issued an RFP for this project. We had heard that the governor was interested in doing a leaseback of the Farm Show complex. This wasn't new to anyone. It had been in his budget proposals. Could you tell me how many bids you actually received for this project?
Yes, sir. We received 4 bids.
Okay, so you received 4 bids based upon the lease and leaseback of the Farm Show. Is that correct?
That's correct. We issued a request for proposal consistent with the Commonwealth's procurement code and regulations, and we received 4 competitive proposals.
Okay, so when I look at the RFP itself, very clearly in the title it talks about this lease/leaseback of the Farm Show complex, specifically named. Under the project description, again, it talks about the leaseback of the Farm Show complex. But somewhere, we've just received payment, correct? Could you just explain it? We've just received $200 million in January for this overall proposal, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Somewhere, I guess my question is, how did the RFP morph itself into what we have as a financing agreement? I'm trying to look through this financing agreement and read some of the terms of the financing agreement. I don't see the leaseback of the Farm Show complex. It's not called a leaseback agreement. It's called a financing agreement. So could you explain how we morphed, or this whole project morphed itself from one set of terms to a separate set of terms?
Representative, the final contract emerged as a result of the contract negotiations that typically follow any request for proposal process. Between OGC, my Office of Chief Counsel, and the prospective winning bidder, we arrived at a contract that was agreeable to all parties.
Do you think maybe if you had an RFP out for the financing agreement, there might have been other entities willing to propose or put a bid in for the financing agreement? Because I see 2 separate and distinct documents. I was just wondering if you ever considered putting out the financing agreement to bid.
Perhaps. I don't think that there was any confusion in the marketplace over whether the Commonwealth was looking to establish what is in effect a financing agreement. It was referred to as a leaseback model from day one, but I really don't think there was any confusion based on the numerous communications that I know my team had with participants in the market.
So you still feel confident, even though it doesn't say that in this financing agreement, you still feel very confident that it is a leaseback transaction?
I feel confident that the final agreement was entered into in a manner that's consistent with the requirements of the procurement code and the original RFP.
Okay. Let's go on now to the actual financing agreement, as it's called. Page 4, paragraph C, talks about DGS and the Secretary of Budget reasonably believe that sufficient funds can be appropriated to DGS by the General Assembly to make all payments owed during the term. Is that consistent with other debt that we issue at the state level?
That's consistent with all contract obligations, virtually all contract obligations that the Commonwealth enters into within the context of Commonwealth procurement and contracts. It is a standard term in Commonwealth contracts that our obligations are subject to appropriations from the General Assembly.
So even though we received $200 million, we received an amortization schedule that details a 29-year payment term totaling, I think, cash payments of $375 million. I have that somewhere. It just seems odd that we would just say that we reasonably believe that we can make payments. But you're saying that's pretty common.
I'm saying that all of our obligations, all of our payment obligations within the context of contracts, or virtually all of them, are contingent upon appropriations sufficient from the General Assembly.
Okay, next page. On page 5, item 5 in the middle, talks about security of this transaction. In the middle, it says, semi-annual payments are not secured by a pledge of the Commonwealth. So I would think in a leaseback of the Farm Show complex that we are using the actual complex as some type of security on the $200 million that we received. But it clearly says on this paragraph that they are not pledged by, they're not secured by a pledge. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay, so what happens if the General Assembly is not reasonable and they're not able to make payments on the $200 million? You know, what happens then? I mean,
I suppose then we would be in default.
but we would still own the Farm Show complex.
That is correct.
Okay. One more question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
The credit rating agencies, you know, how do they see this transaction? Do they see this as far as, we know where our, again, general obligation bonds rank. Where does this fit in their, you know, ranking or of our Commonwealth as far as our ratings go?
Representative, that might be a better question directed towards the Budget Secretary. I do not have any direct dealings with the credit agencies.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to follow up a little bit more on the Farm Show and the lease-back agreement that turned into a financial agreement. So you were obviously the lead agency on this, correct?
We did execute the agreement, yes.
And you also executed the RFP, correct?
That's correct.
And you had just testified that 4 people or 4 entities responded to that RFP?
Yes, sir.
Did any of those entities respond believing that it was a true leaseback?
I believe all 4 entities responded based on the language that was in the RFP. I'm not sure.
Specifically says in the RFP that it is a leaseback.
Correct. I guess what I'm struggling with is your characterization of true leaseback versus false leaseback. I'm not sure what that means.
Mr. Secretary, I guess at some point in time, this changed from what, you know, in all appearances was a leaseback proposal to a financing proposal. And so I'm curious as to why that your agency, you know, remained the lead agency in finalizing this agreement. In other words, did your agency have anything to do with securitizing money using the tobacco settlement money?
No, sir.
So it's not common practice for your agency to do financing, other than specifically for, you know, your projects or you know, anything under your purview.
That's correct.
So why did you not turn this over to a different agency when it became clear that it was morphing into a financing and not a leaseback?
The department was working extensively with the Office of the Budget, with the Department of Agriculture, because DGS issued the RFP. It made sense for DGS to be the contracting agency. It's that simple.
When I read through the agreement and the amortization schedule, which is paid over 29 years, correct?
Correct.
And we have semi-annual payments for the debt, correct?
That's correct.
If we were to pay this debt off early, do we then end on the interest payments, or are the interest payments guaranteed?
I don't know the answer to that, Representative, off the top of my head, but I'll be happy to provide it for you.
It would seem odd to me that you don't know that answer when you were the one that initiated that contract. I know, if I go to borrow money from somebody, I would like to know all of the terms of that agreement and what my ability is to end that agreement. And you don't know that.
I'll be pleased to provide the answer to you.
Thank you. Would you be able to provide the copies of those 4 proposals that came back for the lease back?
Representative, I don't know to what extent those proposals are required to be maintained as confidential, but I'll be pleased to provide whatever information we are able to provide.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Delosier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, over here.
Thank you.
We're moving around on you. Sorry about that. I know a couple questions have been asked about the lease back. I have some issues on authority, so I just wanted to get a couple questions out to you. This agreement was with DGS, the Commonwealth, and the municipal real estate, which from all intents and purposes, what I can tell, that was kind of developed simply for this deal. They hadn't been in existence prior to that for the January 30, $200 million. The governor has made a number of proposals, and it seems that when he doesn't get it passed through the legislature, he just does it on his own, even though the legislative process is supposed to be a part of it. Yesterday we heard from Department of Corrections. They didn't get probation and parole in the corrections merger, so he just did it on his own. This seems to be kind of the same scenario in the sense that he proposed it, it didn't get passed through 253 by majority in the legislature, and so he's doing it on his own. I guess Health and Human Services will be next, since he proposed that this year if it doesn't go through. But
Representative, that's not correct.
what's not correct?
It was not proposed as part of the last budget.
What was not proposed?
The lease back. There was ample discussion of it. There were hearings on it.
Right. So we had conversation about the fact of doing it. He did not get the votes in order to have it happen here in the legislature, correct?
It was never the position of the administration that the General Assembly was required to be a party to the deal.
Oh, so the General Assembly has no oversight of budget. Is that the thought of what the governor thought?
No, it's quite clear that the Commonwealth, that DGS, the Office of the Budget, the governor has ample authority to enter into contracts.
Yes, but you're dealing with the farm show. So my question with authority comes into play with this particular entity. I mean, I've been around government a long time with governor's office, lieutenant governor's banking, office of administration. I've never seen a contract like this. Has there ever been one done like this before?
This is the first of its kind.
That's what I thought. Okay, so the ability for, since it's the farm show that we're talking about, even though it seems that the farm show's not really involved, my question comes to the fact that my understanding, and Secretary Redding was here and said that agriculture hasn't been involved in this contract whatsoever. They're not a signatory. Looking at the signatures that are on it, my understanding with the farm show, and I asked one of the board members, the Farm Show Commission exists in statute, and their jurisdiction is the oversight of the farm show. Why are they not involved with this contract?
Historically, it's my understanding is that the commission has never been involved in capital projects associated with the farm show, or other decisions that have been made historically related to the facility itself. The commission, as I understand it, has been predominantly focused on the farm show event.
Well, I would think if you're going to put the farm show in Hawk, that they would have something to do with the fact that you're using them as the reason for the loan, correct?
I don't believe we've put the farm show in Hawk.
Well,
there is
you're
no
taking a mortgage out on
security interest.
$200 million. You're getting $200 million for the farm show. Correct?
There is no security interest in the farm show conveyed as a...
Right, which might be more of an issue than... Okay, and the other one that I saw that was not on this contract was the Commission's public grounds and buildings. My understanding in statute that they are responsible for all assets and for executive agencies, but yet they're not a part of this. Wouldn't they normally be part of a contract like this? With DGS, I mean.
Our determination with council was that this transaction did not constitute a lease that would have been required to go through the Board of Commissioners of Public Grounds and Buildings.
Is there just, okay, what is the definition of ones that do not go through that entity then?
I'd be happy to get for you the
I didn't know there was a
specific-
differentiation. So there's some that do and some that don't?
That's correct.
Okay, and you're not clear on which ones don't? Can you, that's the information you can get us?
I'd be pleased to.
Okay, I appreciate that. One of the questions that we also had deals with a lot of the whereases that are in the contract, talk about a lot of the stipulations where you have the authority to go in and make contracts and everything else. When this particular contract went into place and everything else, one of the questions that in reading it, I was a little just kind of confused as to the fact that $200 million in cash is going into the general fund, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so all 200 million is going in. And the ability for us to turn that around and that money would be used for DGS, or was it going to other entities?
The $200 million is deposited in the general fund and be used to provide sufficient funding to pay DGS's operational expenses, agricultural extension services payments, state food purchase program costs, and other agricultural operation costs in fiscal year 17-18.
Oh, okay. So that's something we'll just have to follow up on, mainly because the Ag Secretary didn't believe that any of the dollars were coming back to agriculture. So we just have a conflict there. I just need to figure out exactly where those dollars are going and what they're actually paying for, so we know which line items they're going to help in the budget in and of itself for 17-18. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate it. I just have a lot of, I guess, concerns as to the fact that, A, this is a first of its kind of contract, and I'm just a little nervous that, the governor seems to be kind of going out on his own when he doesn't seem to get what he wants from the legislature, and checks and balances are there for a reason, and I think that many of them have been skipped recently. So thank you very much.
With that, Representative Camp.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Secretary, following on what Representative Delosier says, I mean, I've looked at this finance agreement, and, my sense is that we put into the budget documents, and the governor signed it, that $300 million was supposed to come out of special funds, money that was already in the special funds. The administration didn't want to do that, so they used you to issue debt, and that's what this finance agreement is. Plain and simple, it's debt. They gave it this entity that was created for this. I'm sure it's folks who have lots of money. They agreed to give us $200 million, and in turn, by signing this contract, you attempted to bind us to pay back, I think it's about $394 million. And so my questions are really, first, about debt. Is this the first time you have ever signed a contract to issue debt?
Representative, this is the first time I've signed a contract of this nature. It's the first time the Commonwealth has executed a contract of this nature.
All right, and my understanding is, generally speaking, the Commonwealth, a legal entity, has to have legal authority in order to do these things. So with respect to debt, the Constitution of Pennsylvania says that debt is defined as anything that where we issue and have outstanding obligations, and it includes obligations of its agencies or authorities to the extent they are to be repaid from revenues of the Commonwealth. Would you agree that this financing agreement falls into that definition?
Sure.
Okay. So since we are now in agreement that it is debt under the Constitution's definition, I don't know if you're aware, but there are several limitations on debt in that same Constitution. we are allowed to issue debt for tax anticipation notes. Is this a tax anticipation note?
Representative, we're getting...
Is it a tax anticipation note? Yes or no, or I don't know?
I don't know.
All right. Is it debt to, and you can do this to unlimited amounts, to suppress insurrection, rehabilitate areas affected by man-made disasters, or was it approved by the electorate? This financing agreement. Yes, no, or I don't know?
No.
That seems to be, no, okay.
These are questions.
So the other reason.
Excuse me, Representative. I mean, these
I'm
are-
sorry,
these-
I'm asking
these are-
questions.
I know.
Can we stop the clock for a moment, please?
Chairman's license here.
Can we
I
please
understand
stop the clock?
There are questions that would be more apropos for the Secretary of the Budget. The gentleman, the Secretary, has said he's not an expert in this. So
He signed this agreement attempting to bind the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and I believe I'm entitled to ask these questions. So there's another possible debt under the Constitution, and that is for capital projects. Is this debt related to a capital project?
No, sir.
Do we pledge in this agreement the full faith and credit of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
No, sir. Sir, I'm advised that according to the Attorney General, this is not constitutional debt.
Right. So let's go to another question on authority as opposed to debt. So this agreement that you signed has a bunch of whereas clauses. We've already established that it doesn't really have anything to do with the farm show, despite the RFP that you issued. So the Farm Show Commission didn't approve it, even though the statute says that they approve leases. This board of leasing, or whatever it's called, that you sometimes use for your work, didn't approve this. But you say that there are multiple acts, I guess the administrative code, that allow for this. So I've got some questions about that. The whereas clause indicates that you're allowed to, under the administrative code, sign contracts for the carrying on of your operations. Is signing a financing agreement part of carrying on your operations?
Representative, it seems to me your questions are
I just want to know. I just want to know if signing a financing agreement is part of your operations.
I'd just like to be able to answer your question.
And I asked it, and I still haven't heard under the administrative code or some other law or rule related to DGS whether signing a financing agreement, essentially a promise to pay back money with interest, is part of your operations, your department's operations. Yes or no?
Representative, my department signs contracts every day.
I asked about a financing agreement, this financing agreement.
The answer is yes.
Okay. So is generating revenue and issuing debt part of DGS's mission? Yes, no, or I don't know.
The department generates revenue from a number of sources, so yes.
All right, so you indicated that you are following the administrative code. This financing agreement has some other whereas clauses. It says under this section 2401, you're allowed to accept grants and aid, gifts. This is in the agreement you signed. Grants and aid, gifts, donations, legacies, or usages of money extended by individuals. Is this document one of those items?
Yes.
Is it a gift?
No.
Is it a donation?
It's a usage of money.
It's a usage of money. So a usage of money is if somebody gives me $200 million and I agree to pay them $394 back, $394 million back. That's a usage of money, sir? Do you have any citation for the usage of money being that kind of an instrument?
Representative, if it's your intent to question the legality of the contract, you're certainly free to do that.
Well,
But-
that's actually what I'm doing, and you signed it, sir.
I did.
And there is an obligation under the, budgeting and the law of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that when things are passed and signed by the governor, like the code bills were, that he's supposed to follow the law. This does not appear to me to be transferring money out of special funds as was instructed in that code.
Mr. Chairman, the red light's been going on and off, on and off. This is getting a little bit excessive.
All right, my last questions then. Let's say you wanted to
Mr. Chairman.
sign a financing agreement for $1.5 billion. Would you be allowed to do that?
I'm not interested in hypotheticals.
Representative.
Well, I never in my wildest dreams did I think we would get to the point where you were signing a financing agreement. So I think
The contract I signed was thoroughly reviewed by the Office of Attorney General, thoroughly reviewed by the Office of Chief Counsel, thoroughly reviewed by the Department's counsel. It was approved in terms of form and legality, and I felt 100% comfortable signing it. Otherwise, I would not have signed it, sir.